Welcome, everyone, to this deep dive. If you're curious, you're in the right place. Today, we're embarking on a pretty fascinating journey.
We are. We're digging into the ideas of Pietro Ubaldi, specifically from his work, Future Problems.
Right. Think of this as your guide to some, well, truly intriguing insights. Stuff about personal growth, how we see the world, maybe even reality itself.
And yeah, Ubaldi tackles some big concepts, huge ones.
He really does. But our aim here is just to pull out the clear, the captivating stuff, without getting totally lost in the weeds.
Exactly. The mission, if you like, is to get a handle on Ubaldi's perspective on evolution, human potential, and maybe those underlying principles he thought shaped everything.
Yeah, the big patterns.
We're not just glancing at future problems. We want to really understand his unique take on how everything evolves, not just physically, but the spirit, too.
And what that means for us, right?
Absolutely. What drives it all? What are the rules of the game, according to him?
So let's talk about Ubaldi himself for a sec. Who was this guy? And why focus on future problems?
Well, it's the first book in his third trilogy, and it's interesting because he's sort of looking back at his earlier big work, The Great Synthesis,
Okay.
but this time with a much sharper focus on the scientific side of things.
Right. He called himself a walker of life, didn't he? Someone with a lot of experience.
Yeah, loads of experience. And apparently he'd gotten pretty weary of, debates that went nowhere, felt a real need to demonstrate his ideas.
Like with solid proof.
Especially concerning where humans come from and our psychology, what makes us tick.
And his own background is kind of interesting too, isn't it? Early on, people described him using terms like medium, inspired, mystic.
True. His earlier writings definitely had that intuitive, perhaps mystical flavor. But later on, like in Future Problems, he shifts to a more, let's say, analytical, reflective approach. He seemed determined to provide more concrete grounding for those earlier insights, more science-based.
Okay, let's dive into the first big idea then. Evolution. Now, most people hear evolution, they think Darwin. Physical changes. Animals adapting.
Right, the standard view.
But Ubaldi, he argues it's, well, way more complex, multi-layered.
He sees it going beyond just the physical body. He includes the evolution of the spirit.
And he thinks the spirit is actually the cause of the physical forms.
That's his point. The spirit is the driving force, the blueprint, maybe. The physical form follows that blueprint.
That's a big shift from just seeing random mutation and selection.
It is. But it's important to say he doesn't just dismiss Darwinian evolution. Not at all.
Okay.
He accepts the whole struggle for life, survival of the fittest idea as valid, but mainly at the animal, biological level.
So it's true, but incomplete.
Kind of. He even brings up Nietzsche's Superman concept as reflecting that purely biological, power-focused view. But for Ubaldi, that's just one layer.
Okay, so what's the other layer? This is where it gets really interesting, right?
Yes. He talks about a supernormal biology, like a higher level operating with its own rules.
Supernormal biology. And what does strongest mean there? It's not about muscles.
Not brute force, no. On this higher level, the strongest, or maybe better, the most evolved are those richest in wisdom, inner qualities.
Like compassion, understanding.
Exactly. Those qualities make them better equipped to navigate life's challenges, not just physical ones. He points to the fossil record,
How so?
Well, those huge dinosaurs, paleontological giants, they perished. Why? Lack of intelligence, adaptability perhaps, while smaller, smarter creatures survived.
Okay. Intelligence and adaptability trumping size.
That's the idea. So, for Ubaldi, the key thing here is this necessary transition he sees coming.
A transition from what to what?
From the current animal man, who's driven mostly by physical instincts, to a new spiritual man.
And what does that look like?
It means our experiences become less purely physical, more psychic, more internal.
So the mind, the spirit, becomes more central.
Dominant, even. He envisions a future where the spirit leads and the physical body is more secondary, maybe even like an echo of our past, an atavistic survival, as he puts it.
Wow. Okay, so evolution isn't just about changing bodies. It's about consciousness shifting. But it's not always easy, is it? Struggle and suffering come into play.
Oh, absolutely. Ubaldi doesn't shy away from that. He argues that struggle on basically every level of existence is actually a key way consciousness gets built, constructed.
How? What drives that?
Our instincts, for one, but also what he calls the overarching law. Think of it as the fundamental operating system of the universe.
And this struggle looks different depending on where you are evolutionarily.
Exactly. The kind of work being done, the qualities being developed, they change. Lower planes might be about refining the senses, like an artist perfecting their eye or ear.
Okay.
Higher planes focus more on developing spiritual qualities, empathy, wisdom, that sort of thing.
That challenges the simple survival of the fittest idea again, doesn't it?
It really does. He asks, is the whole point of life just selecting the physically strongest? He didn't think so. Well, look at nature, he says. It often supports the weak, the ill. It doesn't always just call them immediately.
Mm-hmm.
For Ubaldi, the ultimate goal seems to be the formation of consciousness. And that requires a huge range of experiences, not just raw competition.
Which leads to this idea of transcendental biology. What's that about?
It's this view that the life of the body itself is evolving towards the spirit. The spirit isn't separate. It's the goal, the result of biological evolution.
A biological catharsis, he called it.
Yes, and he suggests this process might even involve a kind of temporary imbalance. He uses an Italian phrase.
What does it mean?
Roughly a disruption of the normal sort of mediocre balance of a sound mind in a sound body.
So the spirit might develop faster than the body for a while. Maybe even seem to weaken the body.
Potentially, yes. As the spirit grows, it might seem to happen at the expense of the purely physical before eventually finding a new, higher equilibrium.
Okay, that's a lot to chew on about evolution and struggle. Let's shift slightly. Let's talk about truth.
Ah, yes. Another fascinating area for Ubaldi. His idea is that truth isn't absolute, or at least our perception of it isn't.
What do you mean?
He suggests that what we see as truth is relative to our evolutionary plane, our level of consciousness.
So something could look totally different depending on your perspective.
Exactly. He says something that looks ferocious and infernal from a higher perspective might seem perfectly just or even normal from a lower one.
Like how our view of fairness changes as we mature.
Precisely. Think about it. He says this helps explain why Earth might seem like a kind of hell to more evolved consciousnesses.
Because they see suffering we might take for granted.
Right. And from our perspective, the idea of a perfect heaven might seem like an impossible utopia. It's all relative to our stage of development.
So disagreements often stem from people being on different rungs of this evolutionary ladder, seeing different relative truths.
It's a key takeaway, yes. Our truth evolves as we do.
But he does believe in a universal law
Yeah.
underneath it all.
Yes, he posits a single universal law, but it manifests in infinite aspects of truth. Each aspect is relative to a certain degree of development.
So survival of the fittest is one of those aspects.
Yeah.
A relative truth for a certain stage.
Exactly. It's like a rule that applies in one specific game, but it's not the only rule in the universe.
And absolute truth, with a capital T.
That, he suggests, is beyond our current human grasp. We can only get progressive approximations, closer and closer insights as we evolve.
Like slowly zooming in on a picture.
Good analogy. And he argues that most conflicts arise because people are attached to their specific relative truth, mistaking it for the whole picture.
He even talks about a supernormal economy. What's the principle there?
It's governed by this idea that what you put out comes back. Doing good or harm to others ultimately affects you directly.
A kind of karmic boomerang effect?
You could say that. He saw it as a universal law that our current science maybe doesn't fully account for yet.
And understanding it requires more than just intellect.
Yes, it needs a broader intelligence, wisdom, moral sense, not just raw brain power.
So thinking about this, how might realizing our truth is relative and our actions ripple back change how we interact with others?
That's the question he implicitly poses, isn't it? It invites a different kind of responsibility.
Okay, let's tackle another classic philosophical puzzle. Free will versus determinism. Are we free, or are our lives mapped out?
Ubaldi offers a really interesting perspective here. He basically dissolves the dichotomy.
How?
By suggesting that life unfolds across different planes, different levels of reality, each with its own laws. The determinism we see in matter.
Like physics.
Yeah, the predictable laws governing physical stuff, that evolves into the freedom of the spirit. And interestingly, the freedom of the spirit can then influence or shape the material. It's a two-way street across levels.
So free will isn't just yes or no.
Not in his view. He links free will to knowledge, consciousness, wisdom. The more you understand, the freer you are.
And necessity, feeling constrained.
That's linked to ignorance. The less you understand, the more you feel pushed around by circumstances you don't grasp.
Like the chess master versus the beginner analogy you used earlier.
Exactly. They represent different points on the spectrum of freedom versus necessity within the evolutionary scale.
And as we evolve, gain understanding, we become freer. But paradoxically, we align more with the universal law.
That's his argument. Increased freedom leads to a more conscious choice to align with the underlying principles of existence. While moving backward, involution leads to a more rigid determinism, being bound by ignorance.
But both paths tend towards a kind of determinism eventually.
In a way, yes, but very different kinds. One is the determinism of conscious alignment with law. The other is the determinism of being dictated by a lack of understanding.
He also acknowledges limits on free will, right? From our past, our environment.
Oh, definitely. Our past actions and choices create tendencies, and the material world has its own deterministic rules we have to work within.
So true free will grows stronger with enlightenment.
Yes. As knowledge increases, our ability to make choices that resonate with the deeper law becomes more potent. We move from being reactive to consciously creative within those laws.
Okay. Now, connected to all this is another really core idea for Ubaldi. The universal principle of equilibrium. Balance.
Yes, absolutely fundamental. He sees duality, two opposing forces everywhere.
Like yin and yang.
Sort of, yeah. He says every single unit, everything that exists, is made of two contrary, inverse, but also complementary halves.
And so they fight, but they also need each other.
Exactly. They combat and complete each other, creating a dynamic, balanced system. Think about positive and negative charges in physics.
Or predator and prey in ecology.
Good example. He illustrates it on the grandest scale with God as the positive spiritual center and matter as the negative peripheral form.
Like the ultimate cosmic battery.
That's one way to think about it. And this fundamental duality then ripples down, manifesting as cause and effect throughout the universe.
And this isn't just cosmic abstract stuff, right?
Right.
It applies to us.
Directly. He points to examples like metabolism in our bodies, the constant breaking down, catabolism and building up, anabolism, or the interplay of masculine and feminine principles, not just biologically, but energetically. Life itself, he says, operates through this constant tension and balance, struggle within equilibrium.
He even applies it spiritually.
Yeah, using analogies like leaders being central nuclei with followers orbiting them. It mirrors atomic structures, solar systems. It's a pattern he sees everywhere.
And the key for balance is proportion.
Yes, the opposing forces need to be proportional and, importantly, qualitatively similar for a stable equilibrium. You need a balanced opposition.
This idea of balance, does it lead into cycles, things rising and falling?
It does. Which brings us to the cyclical nature of the universe and evolution in his thought.
Okay.
He talks about a universal cyclic transformism. Everything emerges from a fundamental energy or radiation, coalesces into forms, and eventually dissolves back into energy.
Like stars burning out and new ones forming.
Exactly. He quotes the scientist James Jeans about the universe constantly creating and dissolving. It's dying in one place, being born in another, always in flux.
And evolution follows the same pattern. A cycle.
Yes. Ubaldi describes consciousness itself as moving in cycles, progressively moving from the periphery form, matter, the senses,
Towards the center.
towards the center spirit, essence, inner being. It's an ascent towards perfection and potency, or potentially a descent into the depths, depending on the phase of the cosmic cycle.
And this relates to ideas like paradise and hell.
He connects them, but not as literal places, more as relative states or realms of consciousness.
So paradise is the state of the more evolved, hell the state of the less evolved.
Essentially, yes. But crucially, they're relative positions on an infinite scale. There's always higher and lower.
Can you give an example of that relativity?
Think about societal customs. What's acceptable in one culture might be abhorrent in another. Or how we view domesticated animals versus wild ones, or cultivated plants versus weeds. Our definitions depend on our perspective, our level.
So, seeing things cyclically. It might change how we view setbacks.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing them as final failures, maybe they're just part of a down cycle necessary for a future upswing, part of the learning process.
Okay, so bringing it all together, what's the big picture, according to Ubaldi? Where is humanity headed?
He sees us at a critical point, a transition phase.
We talked about this earlier, moving from animal man to spiritual man.
Exactly. He believes humanity is shifting from a primarily animal, instinct-driven biology towards a more spiritual biology. It mirrors a universal process. physical transforming into dynamic, then into psychic or conscious energy.
And this involves an inversion of values.
Yes. Think about teachings that emphasize humility over pride, service over dominance, compassion over aggression, like in the Gospels he often refers to. He sees these as signs of moving from a lower biological level to a higher one.
So these aren't just nice ideas, they're indicators of a biological shift.
That's his argument. They signal the potential for a whole new kind of civilization, built around a fundamentally new type of human being.
One guided more by inner wisdom than external drives.
Precisely. And he suggests the crisis we often feel in the world, the conflicts, the confusion, isn't just external. It's not just politics or economics. It's fundamentally biological. It reflects this difficult transition.
So the change needs to happen inside us, in our actual makeup.
Yes. He talks about needing a change in our brain structure, which leads to changes in our spiritual nature, our mental forms, how we think.
Moving from what to what?
From what he calls a kind of blind, abstract materialism focused only on the physical, without deeper understanding towards an illuminated, concrete spiritualism, seeing the spiritual reality within the material world.
And the ultimate goal of all this progress, all this evolution.
Unification. He sees an inherent drive in the universe towards oneness, toward resolving conflict and division.
Unification in God, or the ultimate source.
That's the term he uses. In that ultimate unity, all antagonism dissolves. That, for him, is true happiness, the real triumph of good over evil. It's the endpoint of the evolutionary journey.
Wow. Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've covered a huge amount today from Ubaldi's future problems.
We really have his view of evolution as multi-layered, spiritual as well as physical.
Right, and the idea that struggle isn't pointless, but actually builds consciousness.
The relativity of truth, how our understanding depends on our evolutionary stage.
That dynamic between free will and determinism, evolving with knowledge.
The absolute centrality of equilibrium, that balance of opposing forces.
And the cyclical nature of everything, moving towards a more spiritual understanding. It's a lot.
It is. These are definitely big, challenging ideas. But they form such an interconnected picture, don't they?
They really do. And they offer, I think, a pretty profound way to look at our own lives, our own development, and maybe our place in the grand scheme of things.
Understanding these principles, even grappling with them, might give you a completely different lens for your own journey, Seeing challenges and opportunities in a new light.
Definitely. So maybe here's a final thought to leave everyone with, building on what we've discussed.
Go for it.
How might really taking on board these vast evolutionary cycles, this idea of struggle, building consciousness, this move towards unity, how might that shift the way you view your own personal struggles right now? Or how you think about where humanity is heading long term?
Could those things that feel like setbacks, those challenges, actually be necessary parts of this much bigger, purposeful unfolding, pushing us towards greater awareness, greater unity?
Something to ponder, for sure. Maybe it sparks some curiosity to explore Ubaldi further, or related ideas in philosophy or science.
Definitely food for thought.
Indeed. Well, until our next deep dive, keep asking those big questions.